Hey everyone, welcome to our webinar, Thought Leadership for Associations. I'm Joseph Riddle with RepCap, and I'll be introducing Beth there in a moment. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about my background with associations. I spent 15 years as the publisher and editorial director, well, not the whole 15 years of the Smart Brief Education Group. I was the publisher of ASCD Smart Brief. Smart Brief is one of the vendors that works with trade associations in partnership to produce newsletter content for them. So that's my vantage point into the industry, into the association world. With me today is Beth Arrett. She has worked in a number of associations, including the Council of Community Banks, National Council for Teachers of Mathematics, National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, and AAAE, the Airport Executives. And would you like to say a quick word about what you do right now with Higher Logic?
Sure. Yeah. So I came over to Higher Logic about a year and a half ago because I got the opportunity to take a lot of the success that I'd had at associations and actually help tons of associations across multiple countries try and have the same type of success. So I loved getting to help members for the one association, and I love AAAE, and it's always going to have a special place in my heart. But the chance to go help so many associations help their members, yeah, I couldn't turn. It's like catnip for me. Couldn't turn it down.
Awesome. And full disclosure to everyone who's watching, Beth and I are actually old friends. We were in my Smart Brief days, and when she was at the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, we were colleagues, and we worked pretty closely together there. So we hope
you're selling yourself short. We launched a Smart Brief that very quickly ramped up to over 65,000 subscribers. So don't sell yourself short there.
That is true. And we became a pretty good source of non-dues revenue for that association.
Oh, yeah, so definitely.
Some good wins there. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And we hope that our conversation today will spark some ideas for all of you. But we thought it was helpful to give that background and context for the view we have into the association world. We both have been kind of circling around it for a long time. So what we hope to accomplish today is we want to just, first of all, we have to talk about the state of things. And also how now we make it better, how we can use content marketing to strengthen the position of associations and professional societies. We want to give you some concrete tactical things, but you guys out there listening, your space, and what we really want to do is spark ideas that are probably going to be unique to your industry, things we couldn't come up with for you. Based on our conversation, and some specific examples of ideas, one of which comes from Beth, and it was a pretty big win. So I'll tease that. So let's start with the state of things. Why content marketing matters for associations. Here is a little bit of kind of the history of things. It's been a story of change. The pandemic was really tough for associations, and it accelerated a trend that was already in place, that associations need to be more reliant than ever on non-dues revenue. There is some good news, in the post-pandemic, 46% of associations and professional societies say that their membership is growing again. So that's really great. But Beth, I'd love to hear your perspective on what the last couple of years have been like for your members and what you've heard.
I've heard across the board that things got really rough. I mean, I know particularly for, excuse me while I just got a frame there. I know particularly for, airports, it was rough because their business was down 90%. Mm-hmm. So they were running at 10% of capacity. And I've heard the same story from most associations. I think the ones that flourished the most were the medical ones, but everybody had to find whole brand new ways to do things, brand new revenue streams. And they had to find ways to not only keep their members, but find their members, because so many people left their jobs. Over 25% of the workforce changed jobs last year. And that meant the associations got hit doubly. So they lost staff and they lost members, and they had to track down new members. They had to make sure that all of their processes, like their renewals and onboarding and everything, was still working no matter if they lost staff. And it's one of the reasons why content became, I think, even more important is those members that they lost, trying to get those back, trying to be seen as a resource. and then trying to use the content to get the new people who filled their seats. So I think that's why content in particular has become really important.
I agree. And, it seems like associations that had already kind of diversified their revenue models and had leaned into things like professional certification or publishing, they fared better. But even those associations got hurt. One association that you and I both know quite well, ASCD and ISTE, they've ended up merging. And, it's just people are having to get creative about how to remain viable and how to continue to serve their industry. So,
well, I think that ASCD and ISTE merger is a fascinating case study, and I'm like, full disclosure, my best friend works at ASCD, so I mean, not that she told me anything about it. I was surprised. She literally sent me the press release. That was the first I heard of it. But it seems like it's going really well, and they're taking it. Yeah, well, it seems like they're taking a really logical, strategic approach to doing it. Everything I'm hearing, from her, just about, oh, we had this meeting today. It sounds like that they're, without having any insight to their actual strategy, it sounds like things are going really well, and the employees on both sides seems to be having, because I know some people at ISTE too. Everybody seems pretty happy with it, and I don't think that we've seen the last of those kind of collaborations.
I don't think so either. And I agree with you. And I've heard the same things, and I know people of both organizations as well. And what's interesting to me is that those are two associations that I would have thought of as having kind of strength outside of dues revenue. ASCD has that very strong publishing arm, and ISTE does training. And even associations like that have those pockets of strength. I think this is just a struggle across the board. And you're right, we probably have not seen the last of those kinds of things.
Well, and you bring up a good point. ASCD had really strong publishing arm. ISTE is really strong training arm. So if you want to get into, if you're ISTE and you want to get into publishing, or you're ASCD and you want to get more into training, do you try and build that up and compete, or do you combine forces?
Yeah,
I think that's it's pretty much the same thing as corporate mergers in the corporate world. At what point do you say, okay, let's merge, as opposed to, I'm going to fight you for business? So I definitely think
right. Maybe we're stronger together. And sort of the background of that is, on the corporate side, I thought this was an interesting change. First of all, I was actually surprised that it was only 77% of Fortune 500s are producing regular blog content, but it was only 53% as recently as 2018. So I guess my point here in including this data is that everybody is a thought leader these days, right? What do you, I'd love your take on that. What do you think?
Everybody's a thought leader?
Everybody thinks they're a thought leader anyway.
I mean, there's this saying that's kind of getting overused, and that's content is king.
Yeah.
And so everybody's trying to put out content. The podcast apps are just littered with dust devils of people who tried to start podcasts during the pandemic and then just left them there to just waste around. It's like turning into the ghost towns in the Wild West in there somewhere. So I think people had a lot more time to think about content when they were stuck at home. And it's, I had this really great idea. Let's try this. And I think it's cool because it brought a lot of new ideas to the forefront, and it brought a lot of new ways of thinking. But at the same time, it was very much a, let's just throw the whole pot of spaghetti at the wall and see if anything sticks. It's not even just like throwing one at a time. And I think now that we're getting, I don't want to say back to normal, because I'm not sure things will ever get 100% back to normal.
Our new normal, whatever that is.
Yeah. New normal, but I do feel like that phrase is a little bit, I think that now things are evening out, and we're finding out where we land.
Yep.
That some of those things are going to go by the wayside, and hopefully people will look back at the data and how those things performed, and then proceed on from a data standpoint on what works, without being afraid to try new things. I mean, fear of failure is fear of any kind of change. But if content is king, then data is its queen.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. And I'll also say that, with regard to the content the corporations produce, no matter how good it is, it's always going to have a profit motive underneath it. It's always going to be
Exactly.
ultimately about lead generation. And I think that doesn't devalue the content, but it leaves open a role for associations to produce a different kind of content that really is, it's beyond just the parochial interests of one company. It's about industries. It's about the consumers that undergird those industries. So it is an opening, but it's this corporate trend is something we need to pay attention to, because a lot of the best content's coming from them, and they have big budgets. So
yeah, and
we
then
have
you
to
get
address
into
it.
the whole thing of if your members are getting all of their content from the companies, and the companies are therefore have all these direct connections with the members, why does anyone need you?
Exactly. and then overlay that with the fact that a lot of associations were already kind of behind in terms of marketing tactics, marketing budgets. You told me a pretty gruesome story in our prep call about like an association you came into, and everything was on spreadsheets. They didn't have any automated marketing, anything. Do you remember what that was?
I do.
I don't know if it's worth going into, but
Yeah,
it's
it
a
was.
common story that a lot of people who are listening probably have lived it. But tell a quick version.
Yeah, so when I got to AAAE, actually, we had an old homegrown database, and I was still in there as a prospect because 15 years before I had bought one set of mailing labels for a conference that I'd done. And they were in constant contact and just mailing everybody. And it was, they had and continue to have an amazing group of people who were dedicated and made it work. But it was the definition of work harder, not smarter. And they knew that. I mean, the people who, to their credit, they knew, okay, there's a way to do this better. And for better or for worse, they let me run with a lot of my crazy ideas to help people work smarter.
Yeah.
And they bought into it. And when I said, hey, let's try this, they actually like, okay, let's try this. So like I said, a bunch of really smart people who were willing to work smarter and willing to do what it took to work smarter and to put money behind it. Because it's not cheap to completely gut your tech stack and start over from scratch. It's not cheap, and it's not easy, and it takes a lot of work, but it's worth it if you can get to the right space in the end. And what we were aiming for was the kind of integration to get that 360-degree view. So we went I started there in May of 2014. In September of 2015, we launched IMUS with a whole cleaned up database, whole brand new way of doing things, a whole brand new website. And we already had Informs, and then we actually integrated the two. So by Thanksgiving, within less than a year and a half of me being there, we were completely integrated with our email and using IQA targets and everything else. So it's not the giant hill that people take it to be. And I think it's something that a lot of associations, Anthony mentioned in the chat here that during the pandemic, your website ran out of bandwidth. Yeah. You had to upgrade your host because you're in air filtration. I saw in aviation how important HVAC became. And it was, the people who were in that, the people who were involved in cleaning and sanitizing, the people who were involved in healthcare in any way, shape, or form, everybody just, you guys were overwhelmed in a lot of cases. You suddenly had demand for more conversation. Even people in the event industry, I've worked on and off with IAEE, the International Association for Exhibits and Expositions. I always get it wrong. I'm sorry, Nicole Bowman, if you're listening. But I have always admired how well they do in terms of keeping people up to date. Like you think you're an exhibitor, and or you're having a conference, you're an association who's doing a conference, and suddenly every different county and location and everything else has different mask rules, different rules on how many people can get together. AAAE did anywhere from 60 to 80 meetings a year. You can imagine how invaluable IAEE was for them at a time like that, because they were keeping all of that information up to date. But you can imagine how crazed IAEE was just trying to make sure they had all the right information and disseminate it. Their community, I'm sure, got slammed in a way it never had before. And it held. Yay, higher logic. It held, but I mean, it was chaos.
Yeah.
Just trying to get the right information out there. So yeah, it was a big deal for the tech stacks, had to catch up quickly.
Yeah. So I think the story here is that things were already kind of challenging for associations pre-pandemic. A lot of things got worse. Some things are getting better, but right now really does seem like a critical moment to get messaging and member value right.
Mm-hmm. Well, we just talked a little bit about the member value that people provided. Particularly, that is going to be ongoing. I mean, IAEE's community was strong and helpful. AAAE launched a whole new sort of sponsorship product that allowed you to go and see all kinds of like white papers and case studies and everything from HVAC systems, to Anthony's example, like the cleaning systems, anything that you might need to help you sort of figure out and navigate your way through what airports needed for that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, lots of new opportunities that came out of it that I think have come up with some good stuff for content.
Cool. So let's get into the key elements of a winning content strategy. So let's talk for a minute about thought leadership, because like content is king, it's one of those terms that has become just almost like meaningless, right? Yeah. So when we were talking about this earlier, you talked about, well, actually, I guess I should do a little framework first before I ask the question. As an association, you guys all know this, your expertise really is your industry network. And accessible, well-crafted content is a great way to showcase what makes your association unique, that expertise at scale. Effective content marketing raises awareness of your membership value, builds trust with your industry, and solidifies member relations. So, I think it's important to think about what value you provide that no one else can. And that's, I think, what you were talking about when you were talking about finding the gaps.
Yeah, find the gaps. Go look at your membership. Go look at what they're doing. See where there might be a gap, in this case, in terms of knowledge. It might be something that's new, like something new that's coming down the pike with industry. It might be something that's not new, but there may be new ways of doing it. Sorry, I'm falling down over here. Sorry. I apologize. I'm traveling, and so I'm in sort of a makeshift office right now. So finding what's missing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, think of it like you're going down a railroad here. You're taking your you mentioned railroads before this. You're going down the railroad, and your association is just tugging along down the railroad. Where up ahead are there going to be like is there going to be like a missing tie, or it might not be, there might be a spike on the rail or something that's going to cause a problem. And I mean, obviously we can't foresee something like the specific pandemic we found ourselves in. But there are a lot of things I'm sure that you can see that are coming in your industry, and good places to look when you're looking for the gaps and what trends are coming is in your data. You're probably going to see a trend in when I'm talking, because I talk a lot about data, but it's a great place to look. I know, for example, going back to my AAAE days, when we would go to do the education for the annual conference, we'd go start talking about what subjects we were going to talk about. The first thing I did was go to our online community, and I pulled keywords. I pulled all of the keywords that were in subject lines. And I searched them for specific topics to see what people had been talking about and asking about over the last year.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did a whole little pivot table to see what were the most important topics. So we went into it with the data. Okay, these are the things that people are really interested in. So,
which is exactly the way we research SEO content. So it really, it does come back to the same thing. You have to listen to what people are interested in, beyond just the corporate members. We can get into that more, but if you have an idea about appropriate ways to amplify other industry voices, whether they're corporate voices or other, I don't know if you have a thought on that. I think, I'm not sure how much we can teach the people who are listening, because probably everyone has grappled with this in their own ways. But you can't ignore the corporate voices. That's my experience. But you have to be selective about how you amplify and whose voices you choose to amplify. What would you say goes into that decision?
Money. No, just kidding. Joke.
Just
kidding. I mean, it's not entirely untrue, but that makes it sound like that's the only thing that matters, that we'll shill out anything that you will pay us for. And that's not the case. Even when we're doing conferences, the educational portion, there are rules about what you can and can't do and say. It cannot be a sales pitch. It cannot be just about your product. It cannot just be, it has to be educational, and it has to be geared towards issues in the industry, the current issues in the industry. And then you can provide other opportunities for sales pitches that don't feel like sales pitches,
mm-hmm.
which is helpful, because people don't want to be sold to.
Mm-hmm.
They want you to tell them a story that shows them why they need the product. I heard the most perfect quote the other day. I was at the Texas SAE conference, and their opening keynote speaker said, people don't want to be a part of your story. They want you to be a part of theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where content and context come into play. And if you can set the context for the industry voices that you're amplifying, for the corporates that work with you, so that it makes that corporate story part of the person's story and not just a story, that's probably the best form of amplification that you can find. And companies will come back and give you more money and stay a corporate partner and pay you a lot of money if you can do that, because they'll get good dividends out of it.
Yeah, it's true. It's a fine line that associations have to walk, though, because for industry credibility reasons and for financial reasons, you can't ignore corporate voices. You also have to be fair, and you have to move the industry forward in a collective way that advances
Mm-hmm.
The interests of the real constituency, which is the people, and not
Mm-hmm.
the corporations.
Yeah.
And it looks like Anthony, our friend Anthony, thank you, has supplied another Answer the Public, which is a great place to go get consumer sentiment information. So,
and then there's a second one that he put in there as well, sparktoro.com. I'm not familiar with Answer the Public. I haven't seen SparkToro. Anthony, we should have invited you along to be a part of this session. You're awesome.
Next time, Anthony, email us. Let's moving along to sort of doing thought leadership right. I think we've covered some of this. It's what are the latest trends, doing that kind of research that we're talking about, and keeping the eye on the real goal, which is member engagement. So we can probably we'll touch on more of this as we keep moving. I'm going to keep pacing, if that's okay, just to keep moving us through.
Mm-hmm.
So what thought leadership means right now? What's your thought on that?
On what thought leadership well, I mean, like you said, that particular term is just so overused at this point. It's like, well, what is thought? You ask somebody, what is thought leadership? I know it when I see it. It's not, thought leadership is not a podcast. It is not a blog post. It is not your LinkedIn post. It is not email. It is not a white paper. It is not a case study. What it is is content that matters to the industry, that matters to your peers, and that helps drive the conversation and the conversation forward and drive progress.
And I would add one more thing to that, because I think that's a great definition. It should be unique, right? Every association out there has a membership value proposition, what you provide that no other association does. Your content should do the same thing. You should think about having a content value proposition. And in my mind, the ultimate test is this next slide.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're producing, like you said, it can be a webinar, it can be a white paper, it can be a guide. Those things in and of themselves aren't thought leadership. It's what you bring that is different from what anyone else can bring that makes it true thought leadership.
It's that context we were talking about earlier.
Yep.
It doesn't have to be a brand new subject or topic. Like you said, it needs to be unique. That doesn't mean it needs to be, oh, I can't talk about security because other people have already written about it. No, it needs to be a unique take on it. Yep. And it needs to be something that helps your members and drives thoughts and drives conversation and drives progress with what is important to them.
So, and we have provided some sources for ideas for where you can find that unique content to offer original ideas in a memorable way. The task can seem really big, but well, it is. I mean, you have to be original. You have to be original, thought-provoking, and distinctive. And I think it's better to produce less content if you can keep it within those parameters than produce more. What's your thought on that?
I agree. And I mean, giving a corporate example here, but it's a good one. We did this content piece called the Campaign Cookbook at Higher Logic, and we did it maybe 9 months ago, and it's still getting rave reviews. People are I was on a webinar and like a couple people held it up. They're like, oh, look, I literally have it printed out. I keep it here all the time. It's my Bible. I use it to make, because what we did was we took some basic campaigns that you would do, not basic in how they are, but the ones that a lot of organizations would do. And we broke it down into like almost like a recipe. Here's exactly how you create the campaign. Here's what you need to think about. And it was really popular because it was a unique take on it. It took away some of the scariness of doing a campaign. So that's the context we're talking about. You still got these campaigns that a lot of people find overwhelming, but it took a lot of the fear out of it because most people have followed a recipe in their life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So rather than looking at this daunting list of instructions, you've got a recipe and you're used to following that format. And it's really finding a unique take on it that makes people look at it differently can be a huge differentiator. And it makes it important. And automation has become such an important thing in associations now because there's so much turnover in jobs that making sure that you have your renewals and your onboardings and your event things going out, regardless of who's sitting in the chair while you get somebody else in and trained up, is critical when you're losing members. And a lot of people are still having to work with a lot smaller staffs because they still haven't come back entirely from the association, which means automation is so critical. And there's so much content going on about it, and people are like, well, I know I need to do it, but it's so confusing. So that was finding that gap.
Yeah.
I'm going, oh, now you just saw me say that it was a corporation that did it. What does that tell you? That goes back to the other example we had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I do want to say just a couple people had comments that I want to touch on.
I'm glad you're moderating that. I should be. What are they saying?
Yeah. So I'm sorry, Mathis. Please tell me if I said that wrong. The benefit of an owned online community platform to see what your specific members are talking about is important advantage, but you're right. You do need an active online community for this, which comes back to giving them content, giving them thought-provoking questions, giving them things to react to, seeding questions in there, putting your like community feed in your newsletter to drive people back because they see what conversations are going on, because they're not going to remember to go back there constantly. Making it something that's a bit like LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever their chosen social media is, so that they do feel comfortable going back. So yeah, absolutely. You have to do things to get active. And then I love Anthony's comment. Thought leader is not a title you give yourself.
Right.
If I find myself liking, quoting, and sharing, and spreading word of mouth about person's ideas, that's a thought leader. Yeah.
It's sort of like if someone tells me they're an influencer, I'm like, really? Like, if you tell me you're a thought leader,
what is your job? I'm an influencer. Sure,
maybe not.
I've never heard of you. Who are you influencing?
I do think, the advantage that associations are always going to have over corporates is breadth, right? They just see a bigger horizon, and you always have to bring that perspective in, I think, to create that value. And sometimes that's depth too, like depth beyond what a corporate goes to, because you are closer in some ways to the ultimate constituency.
Yeah, agreed.
So I did feel like we need to throw something in here about SEO. It doesn't happen so much anymore, but for a while, SEO and thought leadership were words that got kind of intermingled and commingled, and they are separate. The basic formula for SEO, isn't that hard. It's search algorithms are constantly changing, right? And right now they're rewarding things that they didn't necessarily reward 5 years ago. So you do have to kind of stay up to speed on what the trends are. But it's no big surprises. It's strong expertise. It's high authority scores. It's trustworthiness, that unique angle that we were talking about earlier. Right now, the algorithms seem to be rewarding longer form content than they did a few years ago. They're really, you have to be very careful about getting your H2s and your keywords right. We don't need to go into a whole SEO thing, but that is something that my agency does work with people on the strategy piece of. It's basic stuff you have to get right, but if you do it right, you get rewarded for it. And ultimately, I think I love this slide. I included it. Came from another deck that I stole, but
of
the difference between SEO is the tactics to get people to your site, right? It's using keywords and headers appropriately. It is, but then thought leadership is making them smarter when they get there, like actually educating them. And I think that's a helpful way for me to think about those two distinct activities.
Yeah, agreed. We could do a whole other thing on Google and how they're ever-changing algorithms and the recent changes, but we'll save that for another time.
and Apple and how they've made it harder to measure everything in terms of opens. Yeah, they keep messing
opens
with
has been a joke for decades. People just didn't see it.
Well, I think, but everyone knows now, right? And the appropriate response now is that we treat it as benchmark data instead of as like fact. Right?
Yeah, well, my clicks are what you should be looking at this point anyway.
Yeah,
clicks have always been what you should be looking at.
For sure.
It's just hard.
Keep going.
It's hard because most people are like, oh, well, I've got such a great open rate, or okay, my open rates are down. My estimate was always your open rate is probably off by as much as 25%, even before Apple, because if no one downloads the images on your email, we never know it opened.
Right.
They have to either download images or click. And so you had all these people reading, particularly with associations that have business people as their main constituency, because they're using Outlook. And Outlook for well over a decade now has made not downloading the images a default. Yeah. They won't let you open. So that's why I was like, oh, no, if anybody complains about your open rates, tell them that it's probably as much as 25% higher than you actually see. Well, now Google followed suit. So, now that you've got like all these people not downloading images, but they're actually reading it. And then you've got Apple telling you these people opened it, but they really didn't. Open rates mean nothing anymore.
Yeah.
So
you're leading
measure what
right into the
matters.
next. Yeah, you're reading like this is an excellent book by a guy named John Doerr who talks about OKRs, which is oh gosh, I can't even I can't remember what it's for. It's become one of those acronyms. But
I bet
I think
Anthony can tell us.
content.
Anthony, find out what
Yeah, someone out there
OKR
can tell us
stands
what
for.
OKR stands for. Content marketing is particularly vulnerable to fussing over irrelevant data like you're talking about, because we can collect so much data now, and it's an overcorrection to a misconception that content marketing is less inherently analytical, right, than other business functions. We're not. It is measurable. We just have to measure the right things. And if I were you out there, I would pick three things that tell you if you're off track or on track, and resist the urge to measure much more than that. Get granular, and like you say, click-through rates is a really good one. I also think that email engagement stats, overall newsletter stats tend to be really important, because that really represents like the value that you present to your community, like on an ongoing basis. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah. I mean, newsletters are the stalwart of associations. Like
Yeah.
anytime I'm in a room and I'm presenting, I'm like, okay, raise your hand if you have a newsletter. And people raise their hand. And the few people who don't, like, all right, either you don't work for an association or you're not telling me the truth, because I know you have a newsletter, because everybody does. Everybody does. It is the easiest way to make sure that you tell your members what's going on and to show value. But I would argue that probably, I'm going to give a conservative number here, actually, at least 25% of those newsletters are probably not providing the value that the association thinks they are. Because it becomes, over time, it can become like the same way your homepage can if you're not careful, in that you just throw everything on it that every department thinks is important. And you're throwing things in there just to show that you're doing something.
Yes.
And you are trying to make your members a part of your story. And you need to stop and think about how to make yourself part of theirs.
100%. And they're also, I think a lot of them failing that ultimate test is, if we threw this content in someone else's newsletter, would anyone know that it was not?
If I had a daily Google alert for this topic,
right,
would I know the difference between that and your newsletter? If not, you need to think about the other important thing about content that we don't really talk about is the design, making it readable, making it digestible, because it's not just what was the famous quote? It's like 10% what you say and 90% how you say it. Content is the same thing. It's 10% what's in it and 90% how it's presented to somebody.
How it's presented. That's true. Oh boy. And that opens up a whole different can of worms, which is like, we did an overhaul for a tech association earlier this year, which I will remain nameless. But like a tech association with a website that looked like it was straight from 1990, with, I think, like something like 800 toxic backlinks. Like it was like off the charts data I had never seen. We overhauled that and immediately got an 87% improvement in site health and searchability. And that's a tech association that's presenting itself. And we know all the reasons why. It's lean budgets, it's institutional inertia. It's not that the people there aren't smart and don't have the skills to make it better. It's that this stuff does take work. So anyway, that's a little bit of a tangent, but you have to think about your content and your design as part of your market positioning.
It's the 7-word kiss of death, because we've always done it that way.
Oh no! Oh, you're killing me.
7-word kiss of death for an association is because we've always done it that way.
Because we've always done it that way, which brings us to another topic, which is this: to gate or not to gate.
I do want to mention, for those of you who didn't see, that Grace came back with the Grace for the win here. OKR means objectives and key results.
Thank you, Grace. Yes, objectives and key results. Yes. I needed a younger brain than mine to come up with that. So basically, the way we've always done it for a lot of associations, that's gated content, right? But we need to talk about the reasons why that isn't going to work in 2022. First of all, it prevents all of that great original content, the actual unique content we're talking about. If it's gated, it's not searchable. That means it's the search engines are blind to it. It's not impacting your SEO position, and it's not really getting the thought leadership out there. So, I think we have a pretty high bar anymore, and I included this Gallup meta-analysis. It's a high bar for what gets gated anymore, and it has to be so good that it's worth giving up someone's email address, because it just is not the same game as it was even 10 years ago. What are some things that you think ought to be gated or can be gated, like salary surveys? What should people be thinking about that is appropriate to gate in their space?
I think things that have a ton of value. Things that normally you might charge for, or that you've spent a lot of money doing. Salary surveys tend to be like that. Things that you might sell to corporate members or corporate customers, but you want to provide to your members, or you want to provide to potential associations for free. That gets into trouble, though, of like making sure that the person who's downloading it isn't somebody who would pay and just saying they're from association. How do you do that? But I think that it has to be something of great value, and it has to be something that has a lot of expectation for it, maybe. And if you don't have that, like salary surveys, people expect that every year, maybe. Construction and purchasing survey, I think, was a big one for AAAE. And it has to be something of great value. If you don't have that,
trends, really unique surveys, but it's a high bar, and when in doubt, don't gate, right?
Yeah. And if you're going to gate it, and it really is like a high value, you still need to give some of it away. I had a boss who used to call it like opening the kimono a little bit, and it always amused me. So I love that phrase. It's perfect. It's like, or somebody else might say show a little ankle, things like that. But it's about giving enough information that people know it's of value, and that kind of gets to the search engine piece a bit too. If you are putting enough out there, search engines will catch up on your blog post or your post about it, or your web page, or your landing page that hosts it and has the forum and everything else, so that people get there and they know the value when they get there, and they're willing to give you the information. The other piece of it, though, is to go back to your comment earlier about trustworthiness being important for people to trust you as a thought leader. There's a level of trustworthiness of the organization to provide good content involved in whether or not you can even get away with getting it.
Yeah. And I would say getting the SEO and thought leadership game right will actually benefit you in the long run, because that will then, when you do produce a gated asset that maybe you want people to pay for, they'll believe you have the goods.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you just launch an association and come out with a bunch of gated content, people are, what? No, I don't trust you. I don't know you.
Right.
I mean, would I go take candy from strangers on the street? No. Give them my phone and give them my email address? No. Somebody walks to me here, I'll give you a lollipop if you give me your email address. Nothing to do.
Right. Yeah. No, you got to do better than that. And this particularly, if I'm going to pay you, you need to have shown me in the past that you give me something unique.
Definitely.
That's pretty good. So, that's weird. The AAAE logo is showing up. It shows up fine in my deck, but it didn't render here.
Yeah. I can guarantee that it looked fine when we looked at it earlier.
We did. So we are at about 15 minutes at the top of the hour. If anyone out there has questions that Beth and I can address, please put them in the chat. But we're going to talk about some specific examples of associations who've done some things really right in the last few years. This one is a first person account from Beth. She's going to talk about how AAAE, I think they're in a situation now where you said more than 90% of their revenue is non-dues revenue. Tell this great story about rideshare. I think it's so cool.
Yeah. So this is a perfect example of finding the gap. And yeah, it's a first person, but I did not come up with it. I don't know if Jared's out there listening, but it was Jared's baby. So he did an amazing job with it. But the idea was ride shares were relatively new. Uber, Lyft, others that have come along and tried to do the same thing and haven't really succeeded against Uber and Lyft. They were relatively new. And I don't know how many people know this, but airports get a sum of money every time a taxi comes on property and picks up a fare, or comes on property and drops off a fare. And it's done using a transponder, kind of the same way that you pay for a toll on a tolling. Easy Pass, Sun Pass, whatever you want to call it. So it wasn't really feasible to try and get those transponders out to all of these contractors who were driving part-time in their own personal cars. So Uber and Lyft were just self-reporting, and they had no enforcement had no way of knowing which cars should be on property, which one shouldn't, which in the age of fears of terrorism presents its own problems. So what they came up with was a system that San Francisco Airport piloted first, no pun intended, and then we worked with them to create a whole new product called App-Based Transportation Clearinghouse. And it would do all of the reporting for you for the airport, and made it easy because what we were then integrating with the back ends of those servers. So airports, like every airport on the planet, didn't have access to it. And we already had a trusted name for that because we did all of the background checks for 85% of the airport employees in the United States. So we had a trusted name. So that was a product that came out of it. But on top of that product, we then realized that, well, they're like, when you go to an airport and you look for an icon, you know what the taxi icon looks like. You know what the baggage claim icon looks like. These icons all look the same at all airports, pretty much. There's a common icon. Well, there was no common icon or terminology. Some of them were calling it rideshare. Some were calling it Uber and Lyft. Some of them, there was no commonality of what people were looking for from airport to airport. And we saw that gap and put together a working group, came up with, hired a guy who does fonts for road signs to make sure the readability, went through this whole process to really make sure we had the right, did focus groups with, airport customers, the whole 9 yards, and came up with this rideshare icon and a white paper and access to all of the different versions of the file that you would need to make sure you can make the sign and put the icon up. And that was gated content that we even promoted through advertising. And that was really, 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 really popular. And because of the uniqueness of it, and because of how much work had gone into it and the cost and everything else and how much work it would be, and in part to show the importance of it.
Yeah.
It was gated. Because that is something you have to think about too, is there is a certain, just like if you pay for something versus getting it for free, you see more value in it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, depending on the content, you see more value in it if someone's making you give up something for it.
Yeah, fair. For me, I love this example because it's an example of an association paying attention to the ultimate constituency, which is travelers.
Yep.
Creating alignment, bringing corporate stakeholders together around a shared purpose, again, serving the ultimate constituents, which are travelers in this case, and really taking a leadership position in the industry. And I think there are opportunities for other associations to do that. And we've got another one here. These happen to be three associations I know well: the National Confectioners Association, the Food Marketing Institute, now the Food Industry Association, and formerly the Grocery Manufacturers of America, now the Consumer Brands Association. These were all Smart Brief partners at one time. But this analysis actually comes from Forbes. But I do like that it calls attention to this same idea of the associations that are really serving the ultimate constituency, which is the consumer in this case, are the ones that get ahead. And associations that play favorites with their corporate members and try to be I don't know. I don't want to use pejoratives here. The term that the Forbes article used was country club. But it is a fine line. You have to pay attention to corporate members, but you can't let their interests blur the interests of the real constituents, and I think that's one of the important gaps that got identified here. And NCA has done really well. They responded to what the consumers wanted, and they corralled the manufacturers along to get them to that place where they shared that vision. So another great example of kind of finding a gap. And then another one, I wanted to throw in something here that was really specific to individual based membership associations, because we've talked a lot about kind of the corporate interests, but I think the opportunities exist here too for associations that have individual memberships. It's really ultimately the same situation. There is a constituency beyond your constituency that you need to pay attention to, and I think that those that can be a place to find kind of a unique value proposition, to find that content. But for me, the real story of this one is about leadership buy-in. And I know this, Beth, from firsthand experience. It can be really hard when you're on the marketing island to try to create institutional change within an organization like an association that typically has a long history of doing it one way. But I will say, and this, when I look at this slide, it also calls to mind the fact that alignment is super important. 70% of corporate mergers fail to yield shareholder value because of lack of alignment. The two companies come together and the cultures are so different that they can't. We know how important alignment around goals is, and I think the upside here for associations is that everybody is in the mood to take a look at things differently. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. 95% of people are in the mood. The rest of them just want to go back to exactly what it was like before and forget the pandemic ever happened. But yes, I think that there is a huge appetite for ideas and change in a way that there really hasn't been ever. I mean, you could go back to the recession in the early mid 90s and say that at that point there was, but I really haven't seen since then. People are just comfortable that things are going to just continue on eventually and just keep going the way we're going. But I think since the pandemic, definitely, I think part of it too is that members woke up to how much the association could actually do for them online without making them travel, without requiring them to be out of the office for days on end. And I think that anyone who ignores that trend, I know this isn't quite what we're talking about, but it is a form of content. But I think anyone who ignores that trend, that your members have different expectations now than they did before the pandemic, is doomed. And I don't mean doomed like to end, but you're definitely doomed to, at the very least, mediocrity.
Spin your wheels to a certain degree of futility. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have a thought on events, by the way. I noticed this when I went to HR Tech earlier this year. I swear a dozen people said to me some version of, yeah, we're here for the customers and we have had some good conversations, but the real value is getting our team together. We're all distributed now. And I think there's a way for associations to pitch events in that way. I was watching these exhibitors use that time as team building, as bringing people together who don't normally work together. So it just struck me as kind of an interesting angle.
I can 100% confirm that. Yeah. We had 20 some people, Higher Logic, I think, I could have that number wrong, at ASAE's annual conference. And it was amazing. I mean, we always see each other in Zoom, but we rarely ever have the chance to get together and work together and get excited. I mean, we had a new product we were launching too, or we had just launched earlier in the year. So this is the first time we really had a chance to get out in a big group and talk to each other about this in person, as let alone show it to people. And it was fantastic. It was great. Totally worth it. I mean, think about how much
totally different value proposition from events than we would have talked about 5 years ago.
Particularly for exhibiting and sponsoring. Yeah. So many of us are remote now. We're 100% remote. We don't have an office.
Too.
Yeah. And I mean, that's 300 and some people working together over Zoom every day.
Yeah.
And it's taught us things like this. I mean, here I'm traveling right now for work. I'm doing a lot of different, I'm like basically working my way west. I'm in Texas right now. And I'm like setting up shop here in my niece's house. So hey, yeah, sure. But I think that's taught us a lot in terms of how we can provide value. Because at the end of the day, content is meant to provide value. And I think that the pandemic has taught us a lot about how we can provide value. And the thing to remember as you try to go back to normal and the way we've always done things is that your members have also learned about the kind of value you can really provide when pushed.
And they're looking for a different value proposition probably from you than they were before.
Yep.
We do have a couple minutes left. If there's any questions out there, I haven't seen any coming through the Q&A, but I hope some of this has been useful for you guys. We, Beth and I both have spent a lot of time around and in associations and thinking about the challenges that they face. Please feel free to connect with either of us on LinkedIn. Beth actually prefers Beth, and I'm sorry we got your name wrong here.
That's okay. I you know what? I'll answer to almost any variation of it, which is hilarious. It's just like, well, I'll answer to Beth.
Yeah, you're one of the few who uses both Liz and Beth, which I think is like, I don't know very many Elizabeths who do that. So
it's just people over my career in particular, people have like just decided, oh, you're Elizabeth. I'm going to call you Liz now because I know an Elizabeth name, and I'm like, whatever. You know what? It's not that important. You recognize me, you know who I am. That's fine. I'm not precious about it. I'm not. I mean, with a last name like mine that almost no one knows, I'm not precious about that either. I don't care how you pronounce it whatever you want. I'm fine. Elizabeth H. Oh, I totally understand it. Right? So, and it made it worse. My stepmom's name is Betsy. Love her to death. It's awesome. But you've got a Beth Arrett and a Betsy Arrett. Yeah, people call me Betsy all the time. I consider that a compliment. She's an amazing person. I consider that a compliment, and call me Betsy all they want. Like, oh, thank you. I wish I was half as great as her, but thank you.
I'm just plain old boring Joseph or Joe or Joe's. If you guys do have questions for us, please feel free to reach out to me and Beth on LinkedIn.
Oh yeah,
RepCap
I love connecting on LinkedIn. I love answering questions. I will, as you've seen today, I will talk your ear off. So
love it. And just so you know, RepCap is an agency that we're a full service content marketing agency that does work with associations. So if you need a consultation on that, let us know. And you want to give you a 2-minute pitch for Higher Logic too? I think most people probably know.
I came over to Higher Logic because I had so much success with Higher Logic community and Informs, and using all the data from it to help me do other things and get more people involved. We took AAAE from 34 million in 2014 to 128 million in 2019, and with only 2 marketing people, because we use so much automation and data. And I love these products, and I came over here to help everybody else have the same kind of success. We've just launched something this year called Thrive that is amazing. And the more I see about what it can do for associations and how you can consolidate so much and save money and time by doing so, I get super pumped about it. As you can probably see, I'm sitting here doing this on vacation. I'm like, yeah, good. No, this is important. Talking about this stuff is important. But I am super pumped about what it offers. And I highly recommend at least taking a look. Even if you think you know Higher Logic, definitely go take a look at Thrive. You can see like the microsite at thrive.higherlogic.com. I am always happy to connect with you on LinkedIn and give you a quick drive through it that won't cause a salesperson to be contacting you night and day. Sorry, salespeople. But yeah, if you ever want to take a quick look through and you don't want salespeople to be like driving you crazy, don't hesitate to reach out on LinkedIn.
Awesome.
So, yay, Jill, you're getting it 2023. It's so awesome. I love it. It's exciting.
Beth and I are both people who care about associations, who believe that associations have a really important role to play, an essential role to play. And we have teams that want to help you get it right. And hopefully we've given you some good ideas today. But with that, I'm going to sign off. Thank you so much, Beth. It's so fun hanging out with you.
Yes, anytime. Anytime. We still have to have that conversation about that thing too.
Yes, we will. When you're back in the States, we should get All right.
Yes. All right.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
everybody.
Take care, everybody. And talk to you all soon.